I will just walk you through how this topic arrived. So, Avadhana or Avadhana tradition in Odisha. At the onset, I would like to state that I am primarily a musician and I write a bit about music and art and culture. And Avadhana is not my area of specialty, but it has been in my Guru Parampara or Guru's lineage. So, whatever little I will be going to speak are the rare information about the Avadhana tradition that was in practice in Odisha even until the late 20th century. So, and information about it is extremely scarce. This is perhaps the first attempt to present a talk or even to organize information on this topic. So, it is a preliminary investigation in that sense. It is one of the first attempts. So, information is very scarce and it will be limited in that sense. I'm going to restrict myself to the 3 or 4 Abadhanis about whom information is more or less available and reliable in this topic. So, in the Odisha tradition, Abadhana, the word Abadhana is used in a very common sense for the traditional teachers who were born in a clan called Mati Bangsa. Teachers were called Mati Bangsa Abadhanas, and these teachers taught in village schools which were established in the traditional Gurukula system for basic literacy. So that is one sense of the word. The other sense is, of course, the sense in which we are talking about it. Extreme focus or simultaneous focus to multiple topics, which in Odia would be said to pay avadhana, chitta avadhana, etc. Another thing that I should preface you before the talk is that in Odisha, in the Sanskrit pronunciation that is prevalent in the eastern part of India, especially in Utkala, we pronounce Tala, we pronounce Adya Vakara as Ba, we pronounce Adya Yakara as Ja. And these are sanctioned by certain ancient sources such as the Yagyavalkya, Shiksha, etc. And therefore, I would like to stick to that tradition. So please bear with me as I maintain the pronunciation that is native to this part of the country and quite similar to the south and northern ways of pronunciation in some ways and unsimilar in some other ways. So please bear with me while I preserve this ancient form of Ucharana of Sanskritam in this part of the country. So the Avadhana tradition is comparable to other parts of India in Odisha. It was prevalent mostly in the courts of South Odisha in the late 19th century and in the early 20th century. So until 1930s or 40s, it was still going on in the royal darbars, mostly of South Odisha, but also Puri being one of the main centers or the center of the Gajapati king, who was the overlord of the entire state of Utkala and a representative of Lord Jagannatha. The Puri royal court or the Gajapati court also had sanction over these affairs. In South Odisha, the courts or the kings or the princely states that had this Avadhana culture are Bada Khemundi, Sano Khemundi, Dhara Kot, Athagada, Khalikota, Jarada, Parala Khemundi, Manjusa, Tikili, Budharsingi, Jalantara, etc. etc. These are some of the important courts being Bada Khemundi, Parala Khemundi, Athagada, and Khalikota. And of course, the Puri. These 5 centers mainly upheld the Avadhana tradition. One of the earliest people in the Odisha stream, at least, who we have reliable information about, who was an Avadhani, is Kavi Samrata Upendra Bhanja, who is a polymath, primarily a poet who wrote Riti Jugiya poetry or classical Odia poetry in the 17th century. So he lived 1670 to 1740. He was a poet and musician, and his works of music are still part of the important repertoire of Odissi music. So Kavi Samrata Upendra Bhanja, according to various accounts written in the early 1900s, was either a Dwadasavadhani or a Satavadhani. These two words are there, but most sources refer to him as a Dwadasavadhani, including Pandita Nilakantha Das. And even in dramas of the early 1900s, it was a very amusing scene in enactments of his life. The Abadhana scene was an especially popular one. As I was saying, there is a certain difference to the Avadhana examination as it was conducted in Odisha. In other parts of the country, as we know, it is there that simultaneously multiple questions are asked one after one, and then the answers are given. The answerer is supposed to memorize the questions, formulate the answers, and reply back to back, responding to those questions. There was an additional layer of the Avadhana examination conducted in Odisha's courts, which is the information we get from my Guru Parampara, that my Guru's Guru Acharya Tarini Chanapatra, as he presented in the 1920s in the Khalikota or Athagada Darbars. The system in the Odisha Darbars was that it was not just that you have to answer simultaneous questions after the preliminary examination, which is the simultaneous memorization and answering, as in the other parts of the country. There was an even more thorough examination. For example, if in an Ashtabadhana examination, if there were 8 topics such as Sangita, Darshana, Tantra, and all of these, then each topic would be assigned a week, and almost a week, 5 days in some other cases. And there would be continuous examination from early morning until late in the night. And this was, and there was only a 1 hour break allowed for food, including both lunch and dinner. And apart from that break, the answerer was expected to continuously answer, and each topic had multiple questioners. So even if Sangita is one discipline, there will be multiple questioners within Sangita itself. There will be one person who will be expected to ask only about composition of songs. There will be one person who will be expected to question only about ragas, another person only about talas, and that tradition persisted. So that is what we'll talk about later. And this is why even in the 20th century, as far as we know in Odisha, mostly Ashtabadhanis existed. People having the title of Dasabadhani or Dwadasabadhani were long gone even in the early 1900s. The titles were known, but mostly Ashtabadhanis existed in the 20th century. 20th century. So as a great discusser of ancient Odia literature, a polymath himself, Gauri Kumara Brahma, a traditional Pandit who expounded the literature of Kavi Samrat Upendra Bhanja, he has stated in sometime in the 1980s that he met that ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ସୁଦ୍ଧା ପଶ୍ଚିମ ଭାରତରେ ବିଶେଷତଃ ଜୈନ ଧର୍ମାବଲମ୍ବୀ ଗୁରୁବର୍ଗଙ୍କ ମଧ୍ୟରେ ଶତାବଧାନୀ ଓ ସହସ୍ରାବଧାନୀ ଅଛନ୍ତି. He states that in Western Odisha, in Western India, Satabadhanis and Sahasrabadhanis existed in 1975, in which he is writing this. He says that we met in Bhubaneswar a Satabadhani from western part of India in 1974 with 2 of my friends. We questioned him and we realized that what we call Satabadhani in Odisha is a very different test from what Satabadhana implies in other parts of the country. In other words, he's stating that the qualification in Odisha is of a much higher, it requires a greater examination. It's a more probing examination. And which is why even an Ashtabadhani examination in Odisha consisted of 7 into 8. So each discipline would be 24 hours, from 24 hours, barring some 5 hours for sleep, as we have heard in our lineage, some 5 hours for sleep and 1 hour for food. Apart from those 6 hours, the answerer was expected to continuously answer questions for 7 days together in a row about a single topic, and thus for each of the 8 topics. With that in mind, we'll get back to the earliest that we know of, Kavi Samrat Upendra Bhanja, that we're talking about. He is known as a Dwadasabadhani, and in other accounts, as I mentioned, he was also called a Satabadhani, so which is known from his writings. The most of the reliable sources that we have are the own writings of these people, and that reveals a lot about the kind of mastery they possessed over the various disciplines. In the works of Kavi Samrat Upendra Bhanja, we find significant mention and even attempts to write or formulate newer versions of the Kosha Granthas. So he has formulated a Kosha for himself, that is a different thing, named Gita. He has written Sangita Kaumudi by name. He has written a Jyotisha Shastra, which is called Katabhaya. He has written a Kama Shastra called Panchasayaka. He has made significant references to us He has made significant references to the ancient kavyas, of course, in which in the Odia tradition, it was known as Lagutrayi and Gurutrayi. The three works of Kalidasa, Raghuvansham, Kumarasambhava and Meghaduta were referred to as Kalidasa Trayi or Lagutrayi, and Kiratarjuniyam, Shishupala and Naishada. These three were referred to as Gurutrayi. So Kalidasa's works were meant to be a basic introduction to higher Sanskrit poetry of Bharavi, Magha and Sriharsha. So that is the method by which Upendra Bhanjar learned in the Gumusara region, what is heard from the living tradition. He has written significantly about the Vyakarana Shastras of Panini. He has written significantly about the Shadadarshanas. He has written significantly about the Dharma Shastras, Ayurveda, Vedas and Vedanta, Shakuna Shastra and Alankara Shastra. He himself authored some 3 or 4 Alankara Shastras for that matter. And the people who were his closest friends are also known to have been equivalent masters. And a common thread that runs through these is in Odisha, most of the Avadhanis were in some form of tantric worship or some form of mantra diksha in the early 1700s to even 1900s. So Upendra Bhanja was known to be Siddha in the Rama Taraka mantra. His friends so in the Dakshina Kalika mantra, in the Bhuvaneshwari mantra. And then there was others who were known as Eka Santha Grahi, people who could listen to things at once and remember and recall, which is something that is found across the Indian subcontinent. In the works of Upendra Bhanja, we find exceptional mastery and reflection of all these disciplines, even in his kavya. So as he makes significant mention into the grammar of these forms that was prevalent in his time in the 1700s. And in that, the kinds of classification he mentions, of course, they bear similarity to the Pan-Indian tradition, but then there are several kinds of things that are very unique to the Odisha tradition. For example, look into his Odia poetry, which was meant in some senses to prove that Odia as a language is as equipped, even though as a Prakrita Bhasha. He wanted to show that even in the Odia language, the literary techniques or the sonic techniques of the Sanskritam could be reproduced, even though it is a Desha Bhasha. In that sense, he has created several things. There are the more common things of Jamaka, Nuprasa and all that, and he has taken that to an extreme. Even so, as mentioned, like doing things such as Sakaratraya, writing padas which only have the 3 sakaras. So he writes Sangsa Sasi Sisu Sri Sesa Sesa, Swangsa Sasi Sisu Sri Sesa Sesa. These kinds of things. Then Duyakhyara, Rasare Saro Surasa Sarasi, Sangsara Siri Surasa Sarasi. Ekakshara, Ha 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 ha, hu 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 hu, ha 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 ha, hu 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 hu. These are all meant to be sung, by the way, in the Odia Chanda tradition. Then, of course, the common things of Niroshtya and Saoshtya. Then, of course, Bahuartha. He has written stanzas in Odia such as Bandhavi Dina Bandhava Hari Je Tamo Chakra Khandana Kari Sada Kamala Nanda Vistari Swabhave Inaje. These, the single stanza can be interpreted in some 21 or 22 ways. In ancient Odisha, it was a common pastime of the Pandits to explain it in even further, more and more ways. So that is possible in the literature of Upendra Bhanja. Then there is Antarlipi, Bahirlipi and all those common techniques. He has also written Chitra Kavya in some 84 bandhas, different kind of bandhas. In one of his writings, he makes a comprehensive list of the techniques that he has employed. I would think it apt to cite it here just for the reason that you listen to the various names of the literary techniques in vogue in medieval Odia literature. So the Avadhana tradition in Odisha, it was not restricted to Sanskritam. It was, of course, done in Sanskrita, but then it was also in vogue in the Odia language itself, within which so many variants and so many possibilities were created first, as far as we find documentation, by Kavi Samrata Upendra Bhanja. So he mentions the techniques. Sardula Kridita Mandaka Pruti Lomo Bilomo Turangama Gati Bahirlipika Jana Jati Pancha Sata Prakare Antarlipi Sancha Prashna Uttara Aja Mesa Juddha Jamaka Riti Padacheda Siddha Singhavalokana Srunkhala Dui Gomutra Padma Matsya Bandha Hoi. So now he is mentioning the Chitra Bandhas. Jaladra Sakata Padma Chakrahi Vyuhaka Chanda Gananare Kehi Varna Bahuta Koshthire Sankhepa Prasada Katina Artha Swarupa Chuta Datta Datta Chuta Akhyara Saosthya Nirosthya Shlesa Vichara Ekakhyara Duyakhyara Rachana Sakala Prakare Muhai Mana. So these are the techniques that he mentions. And then he has also written padas entirely using music terminology and vocabulary, which was replicated by other poets of the 18th century, such as Utkala Ghanta Jadumani Mahapatra, padas which reflect their great mastery over other fields of discipline, such as, for example, in Sangita, Jadumani has written, who are also known to be an Avadhani. We do not know the exact number, but his family preserves the title Avadhani for him. So Jadumani has written a stanza which reflects his deep insight into the Sangita Shastras. He writes, Shankara parajare padi rahile jogo asabari gauri. So Shankara parajare padi rahile jogo asabari gauri. These things were, this is known as Chanda. It is a genre in Odissi music. It was sung in this manner. So he's written an entire stanza in which all it consists of are names of the various ragas. Then it has a different meaning based on different kind of sabhanga and abhanga techniques. So Shankara refers to a raga called Shankara Abharana. Paraja refers to Paraja. Shankara Parajare padi rahile joga asabari. Asabari is a raga. Gauri is another raga. So this is interpreted as Shankara Para, which is Kandarpa, the enemy of Shankara. Shankara Para Jare, in the fever of Shankara's Para. Then Joga Asa Bari Gauri. Bari Gauri. So these are it is very difficult to translate this kind of Riti Jogya poetry, but then it is interpreted in multiple ways. Then there was another technique that was invented by Kavichandra Raghunatha Paricha of the 19th century, which had its predecessors also, which was mostly brought to the foreground by Kavichandra Raghunatha Paricha, also an Avadhani, who gave his Avadhana test in Katak, which is documented in the newspapers of that time, as the people have reflected as his extempore mastery over composing songs immediately in a glance and based on the requests of the questioners. So Kavichandra Raghunatha Paricha has made very popular the composition of Odia padas in the style of Sanskrit vrittas. So in that sense, Pinda Janaki Basile Mandape Sasaniye. So this is actually Odia, but it sounds like Sanskritam. And these kinds of phrases have been in vogue even before that. That is a folk saying which has been passed down by the greats, which is pure village rural Odia, but it sounds very much like Sanskrit when read in the proper. Alo lo Janaki nani Raja Varta Katha kaho. This is very pure Odia, and it is very amusing for somebody conversant in Odia to listen to this. But these kinds of padas were also as an exercise in the Avadhana tradition. Then there was another tradition which is called Akhyara Manasa. The Akhyara Manasa, we are only talking about the Kavya branch of the Avadhana texts. There was another thing called Akhyara Manasa. Akhyara Manasa is a technique in which several stanzas are uttered either in Sanskritam or in Odia. And for example, there are 5 stanzas in a poem. And when these 5 stanzas are uttered, the person in front of you is expected to think of a letter in their mind. For example, I recite 5 stanzas and you, the listener, think of the letter Ka in your mind. All you have to do is you have to count the number of the occurrences of Ka in which of the stanzas. So you will have to tell me that the letter I thought in my mind presents itself in the stanzas 1, 3 and 5. Then there is a simple mathematical calculation by which I can back calculate which is the letter. So this is called the Manasa technique, and this is here presented in the Akhyara sense. Then it is extended to further applications such as the Phula Manasa or Phala Manasa, in which I will again, it is the same technique. I will say 5 stanzas having names of different flowers. You think of a flower's name and then you have to tell me, and it goes on like that. Alankara Manasa and various kinds of Manasa. So these techniques have been reproduced both in Sanskritam and in Odia. A story that goes, a traditional Kimbadanti that goes is that Kavi Samrat Upendra Bhanja visited Banaras or Varanasi, and then in Varanasi a Pandit presented him with a Sanskritam couplet. Akhilanath Hare Hari Sevita Chalahata Sura Neera Dharat Chabe Jasa Vilochana Charu Tara Nano Dhara Nirantara Badham Vivadhitum. That is the Sanskritam, and he encouraged Upendra Bhanja to recreate the same using 5 stanzas in Odia. This is an Akhyara Manasa. That is, the listener listens listens and thinks of an akshara. Upendra Bhanj writes in Odia, Laya rahu ahanath charana sarase, jogi jana jare bhaji bhase swasthya rase, aharnisha jara joge jhalase rasare, ahare je raje nabhe jhade je nisare. All this is meant to be sung, not to be recited. So in the traditional method, it would be sung somewhat like Laya rahu ahanath charana sarase, jogi jana jare bhaji bhase swasthya rase, অহর্নিশ যার যোগে ঝলসের সারে অহরে যে রাজে নভে ঝড়ে যে নিশারে. These were sung in this manner. The story goes on that the Pandit in Banaras is surprised by Upendra's ability to reproduce this technique in a Deshiya language in Odia, and then he says whether the poet has involved any other technique in the composition, or is it just a simple manasa? And Upendra, in fact, has incorporated 5 stanzas in such a manner that all the 5 stanzas talk about the Panchadevas. So that is the kind of word jugglery or verbal and sonic jugglery that was prevalent in Riti Jogya Odia literature. We will move on to the second name. I have been with great difficulty able to procure only 4-5 names of Avadhanis in Odisha. I'm sure there are more. This work needs more documentation and more research and more time, of course. It has become an increasingly rare thing in our state. The second name is of Chandaraya Guru, who was a resident of Veera Narasinghapura near Puri. It is one of the Shasanas established, or Shasana villages established in Puri, Brahmin villages established in Puri. And his brother was named B.C. Pattajosi. His brother was a Nayayika, and Chandaraya Guru himself was adept in many disciplines, specifically Ashtadasha disciplines. He was known as Ashtadasha Vidyavetta. Ashtadasha Vidyavetta. So in many ways identical to the Avadhana tradition. The story goes, he has composed an Usha Parina Nataka, and the story goes that he was a sadhaka of Devi. So again, that running tantric stream that is prevalent in Odisha. He was a sadhaka of Devi, and that had given him a mystical ability to know the Bhuta, Bhavishya and Vartaman. And he lived during the time of Birakishora Devata, sometime in the 17th, 18th century. And Birakishora, the king, goes lunatic at one point of time. The king loses his mental balance, Birakishora Deva, during which Chandaraya Guru as the royal preceptor, prescribes to the king that you are no longer fit for the Singhasana, therefore please give it to your son. And the king disagrees, on which Chandaraya Guru does not know what to do, and then he approaches the Raghuji Peshwa of Nagpur. That is what the tradition goes, because Maratha rule had already become a thing by then. So he goes to Raghuji Peshwa, and the story as far as Odisha is concerned goes that in the court of Raghuji Peshwa, the tradition was that there was a dholak kept at the door, and the thing was that any person, any pandit who wants to enter the court had to beat the drum as many times in as many disciplines as he was versed in. So Chandaraya Guru bet the dholaka a total of 18 times. As we know, his title was Ashtadasa Vidya Vitta, and this is with his brother B.C. Pattajosi. He knew that his brother was more skilled in Nyaya than he was, so he took his brother along. And it is known that both of those brothers passed the test there, and Chandaraya Guru subsequently went to Banaras and passed some tests by the Kashi Vidvat Parishad's predecessors. And then he returned. And that is the story that is known. So he is one of the Avadhanis of Eastern Odisha in the Puri part. Another of the Avadhanis that we know is Kavisurja Baladevaratha. Again, Kavisurja Baladevaratha, primarily Odissi musician, composed something known as the Kishora Chandrananda Champu, lived in the 18th century. So he composes an entire kabya known as Champu. Champu as defined in the Sangita Shastras as well as elsewhere. Gadya Padyamayam Kavyam Champuritya Vidhiyate. So in the Champu, he has made the Padya part in Odia. He has made it in form of Odissi songs in Odia, and he has made the Gadya part in Sanskrita or in Sanskrita. And the speciality is that he has introduced additional rules in which each of the Odia part is divided. The Padya part is divided into 34 songs with equivalent corresponding 34 prosaic parts in Sanskrita. And each of the 34 songs is assigned to one of the Vyanjana Varnas of the alphabet. And from ka to kya, as we would say in Odia. So ka to kya, and for example, the ka song, each of the lines will begin with ka. This was a common technique in Riti Jugya Odia poetry, Adya Akshara and Pranta Akshara. So ka Adya, kha Adya, go Adya, that is how the technique would go. That is one of the masterpieces, and we know that in his lives many such instances of testing him. He is also known to be a Dwadashavadhani, Kavi Surya Baladeva Ratha. In that part, in the Boirani Athagada part, especially in our Guru's Parampara, because he belonged to Athagada and especially Kavi Surya's direct Shishya Parampara, Kavi Surya was known to be a Dwadashavadhani himself, much like Bhanja. So in Kavi Surya's tradition also we find the same things going on in the Athagada royal court, Ashtadurga royal court, where the king was Balungeswara Jagadeva Harichandra. In that court, various things like Pada Purana and assigning a meaningless pada and expecting the poet to fill in the blanks to in order to make it sensible, and assigning these prantakshara and adyakshara niyamas, of course, then saying compose this in this musical form, because in the Sangita Shastras there are a variety of prabandhas. A prabandha is a song with definite set rules. So prakrishta rupena bandha. So prabandha, that prabandha is divided into various types depending upon the angas that appear in the prabandha. A prabandha in the Utkaliya Sangita Shastras have Shadanga, Pada, Pata, Swara, Tala, Tena, Viruddha. These are the Shadangas. And these Shadangas are expected to occur in different various combinations and reflecting various kinds of topics and literary techniques in the various prabandhas. The types of prabandhas are said to be countless in the Sangita Shastras. So what happened in the Athagada Darbar during Kavi Surya's time, as far as we have got it, is that he was asked to compose numerous prabandhas. So it would be like compose a Simhalila prabandha in this raga and this tala, having this akshara as adya and describing that topic with this padapurana. That is the kind of thing that was asked, and he completed these tasks apparently. That is one part. And this prabandha culture existed until 18th 19th century. That was the bulk of the Sangita questionnaire as part of the Avadhana examination, which I will go into more deeply in the end. So Kavi Surya's work reflects that, and of course the variedness of meaning, having two layers of implicit and explicit meaning, that is so very common in India. Another of the recent acharyas that we know in the Avadhana is in the 1850s, Dasarathi Kavichandra. Dasarathi Kavichandra, who was a great Sanskrit Pandit who lived in western Odisha. So in Bamanda, the state was called Bamanda. Maharaja was Vasudeva Sudhaladeva. In Vasudeva Sudhaladeva's Darbar, there was Dasarathi Kavichandra, who was known as an Ashtabadhani. And Ashtabadhani has demonstrated his Ashtabadhani ability in Puri and Cuttack, and that has been covered by the newspapers of that time. It has been covered by Kavivara Radhanath Rai, one of the leading literateurs of Odisha in that time, who has written that I lived in Puri 15 years ago. At that time, I met Dasarathi Kavichandra for the first time, and I saw his mastery over Sanskritam poetry. So he was he did Avadhana purely in Sanskritam. So I saw his Avadhana in Sanskritam, in Sanskrit poetry, as well as his knowledge of the classics of Sanskrit. And he was asked to compose using various rules, and he has given examples of the shlokas composed by Dasarathi Kavichandra. Namamang Ramang Manimaudi Mandana. I think this is a corrupt form of printing in the magazines of that era. Jatha Prabhate Latika Prasuna Vasanta Batang Himabindu Sarini. It has some chanda errors as in the mudrana of that era, but at least that is nonetheless all that we have. Unpublished works of Dasarathi Kavichandra, as far as information we have got, lies in the state of in the Royal Library of Bamunda even until now, awaiting further publication. So the newspapers cover that he used to compose within 2-3 minutes of being asked a question. Dasarathi Kavichandra got the Ashtabadhani title from the Bamunda court. So that is the Western Odisha tradition. We will end with my Guru's Guru, about whom I know more direct information thanks to the Shishya Parampara. My Guru Pandit Ramarao Patra is a student of Ashtabadhani Acharya Tarini Charana Patra. Tarini Charana Patra being one of the, as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the leading Odissi musicians of Odisha in the 20th century. He was born in 1893 and lived until 1979. About him, we have more concrete information regarding exactly the nature of the questions. So a different system was in vogue in the Ashtabadhana examination of the Khalikot court. He presented it in the court of the king Mardaraja, Ramachandra Mardaraja, who supported him. And in the Khalikota in South Odisha court, he presented Ashtabadhana examination lasting for almost a month. And back then in Khalikota, Ashtabadhana and Dwadashabadhana were in vogue. So some Dwadashabadhanis were alive and were present during the examination of Tarini Charana Patra. And the fields, as far as we know in Odisha, were variable depending upon the person who was giving the Avadhana examination, and they could choose it. The fields that Tarini Charana Patra chose were Chaturanga, Kavitva, Lekhana, Kanthagrahana, Ganita, Sangita, Juktikarana, Vyaktakhyara. This is as told by the man himself. Within these disciplines, what exactly each of these fields encompass, we are not aware of. So Chaturanga, we are not aware of. We can only guess. Kavitva, we know. Kavitva, all those techniques that I mentioned even until now, that. Lekhana implies something different that we are not aware of. Kanthagrahana, we are not aware of. Ganita, Lilavati Sutras and the living Ganita tradition. Sangita, which is the core field. Juktikarana, again, that we are not aware of. And Vyaktakhyara involves some. Vyaktakhyara is a field that we know roughly about. Vyaktakhyara apparently involved some kind of guessing the future, as in the somewhat corresponding to the Manasa concept that I mentioned earlier, as far as information I have been able to gather until now. In the field of Sangita, however, we know exactly the different exams that were conducted. As Tarini Charana Patra himself stated, within Sangita, the examinations conducted were Kantha Sangita or vocal music, Veena Vadana or instrumental music playing the Veena, Mardala Vadana, playing the Mardala, which is the primary percussion instrument, the classical percussion instrument of Odissi music. Then within those disciplines, further subdivisions. Within Kantha Sangita, there were various niyamas called Swarartha Prayoga. So this is going to the Shastras of Odissi music, written from the 15th century onwards, Gita Prakasa, Sangita Narayana, Sangita Muktavali, Sangitarnava Chandrika, etc. and various disciplines. No, Chaturanga is not chess. Somebody has written in the chat. Chaturanga is not chess. It was some different discipline, as far as we know. That we have been able to clarify that it is not chess. Board games were very much not a part of his examination. It might have been in some other things. So within Kantha Sangita, as I was mentioning, there is the Swarartha Prayoga, then there is the Suda Prayoga, then there were various things called Gamakas or Panchadasha Gamakas, Tanas, etc. These things I can demonstrate to some extent, as we have been passed these down in our traditional pedagogy of the South Odisha stream as per Tarini Charana Patra and his gurus. What we have got in that tradition is that in the Shastras that I mentioned, written from the 15th century, Vyaktakshara is arranging jumbled letters in a meaningful line. Thank you for that. It seems useful and plausible explanation. So Swarartha Prayoga I will begin with. In Sangita Narayana, written in 1650, which is the main Sangita Shastra that our Guru Parampara follows, there is the Swarartha Prayoga, in which a song which is presented in the Sahitya and the Swara, both the same Akshara, when it falls, then it is called a Swarartha Prayoga. For example, in the writing of Kavi Kalahansa Gopala Krishna Pattanaik, an 18th century poet belonging to the same Paralakhemandi school where the Shastra was written. Okay, Vyastakshara and Vyaktakshara are two different things. Okay. So I was talking about Swarartha Prayoga. Radha Pori Radha Sina Re Sangini Radha Pori Radha Sina श्रीमातर अछन्ति जेते सर्वे पितल से सुनारे संगीनी राधा परी राधा सीना. So this will give you an example of how deep the examinations in each of the disciplines was. The notation or the Swaralipi of this song will be Sadha pa ma ga ma ga pa ma ga re sa re ga ma. This is set to the raga Malava Gouda and the Tala Jati Tala written by Kavi Kalahangsa Gopal Krishna Pattanaik. So Radha Sadha pa ma, the dha is coinciding. This is called Swarartha Prayoga. The questions in the examination included this kind. Write a song that is entirely in Swarartha Prayoga. You can imagine how difficult it will be to ensure that each of the letters will be according to that, each of the letters. So we have received certain lines of these songs called Dhara, Dhara, Saragama, Padana, and including the various matras that can be added. That is the set that you are limited to within these 7 letters, and the 3 shas you are free to use. In place of ra, you are free to use ru. You can use padhana. You can use the lower. You can use the in place of the. So that is about it. That is the flexibility allowed, and within that you have to compose so that it coincides, and then it has to be following the rules of the raga as well. This was Swarartha was one of the prayogas in the Kantha Sangita examination. Then there was a Suda Prabandha. A Suda Prabandha, also called Padi in Odia, refers to a song that is written such that the talas come one after other cycling. For example, as we present the Padi in the Odissi stream, Tribhangi Chande Cheda Sire Mayura Chuda 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 Tribhangi Chande Cheda. So this is cycling through different talas, and there is a prescribed shastric order. Adau Adi Tala, and you end with Ekatali. That is the order that is prescribed, and you can have a number of talas in between, each with their own Krishna niyamas. And many of these talas have gone out of vogue and have several varieties themselves. So in the Suda examination, it is very difficult to compose a line. If you are following the Guru Laghu Niyamas, it is very difficult to compose a line that falls exactly within the Guru Laghu patterns of each of the talas, especially as you approach the longer talas such as or Singha Leela or Hamsa Leela, talas like that. So they used to do that as an examination. Then you have a discipline called Tana. Tano or Tan as it is known today, which was earlier classified into several types such as Chakratana, Viparita Tana, Viloma Tana, Anuloma Tana, etc. And Granthila Tana, Nagabandha or Nagapasa Tana, which was also called Sarpida Tana, and then Lata Malika Tana, and these various kinds of tanas that have been passed down to us, which were depicted in the form of various chitrabandhas that is also used in Chitrakavya tradition. In Odisha, the chitrabandhas that are used are somewhat unique to the and reflect the native Patachitra tradition and Odia Kalinga Shilpa tradition. So that was incorporated in the training methodology. For example, in songs, so Mone ki panchila re, the composition of Kavi Samrata Upendra Bhanja in the Raga Suddha Bhairava and the Tala Jati. Here there will be a part that will be appended, and there will be a long flowing part, which is a specialty of the Ganjam school of Odissi singing. Mora mane ki panchila re, Mora mane ki panchila re, Mora mane. These different kinds, the variations or the binyasas presented in the line Morama. So Morama Mo Rama, Mo Rama. These various types were classified into Chakratana, Viparitatana, Vilomatana, Anulomatana, and so on and so forth. And this was also a condition that was maintained. These tanas were meant to be sung and incorporated and composed on the spot with the literature, again, Guru Laghu, following Guru Laghu patterns. Then there are the Panchadasha Gamaka Vidhana, which is a specialty of our school, because in the Ganjam tradition, the Veena was given extreme importance. And the Panchadasha Gamakas, according to the Sangita Narayana, are Swarasya Kampo Gamakah Srotrochitta Sukhabah Tasya Vedastu Tiripas Purita Kampitas Lina Andolita Badis Tribhinna Kurulahataha Ullasita Pravitascha Gumpito Mudritas Namito Misrita Panchadasayati Parikirtita. So 15 Gamakas. In South India, there are Dashavida Gamakas. In the Odisha school or Odissi music, there are Panchadasha Gamakas. So these have been taught to us as with native Odia explanations or etymologies. Tiripa. Tana Sarisa. This is called Tiripa. Then there is Furita. Pa pa ni ni sa sa. The occurrence of dual notes together, couple of notes. Then there is Kampita. Ni ni. This technique is called Kampita because the human voice shivers. Then there is Lina. One note getting Lina into another note or fading away slowly into another note. Sariga sa. This is called Lina. And this was taught, in fact, through songs. This was not taught like this. So they were taught Nahi ki Sriyanga Sukha. So this is called a Lina. Then Andolita, the fifth Gamaka. Sa ni da pa ma ga 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 ma pa ni da pa. This is something that is very unique to the Odissi music school, and this is not present elsewhere. So Kisho Bhago Kunje Madana. This is called Andolita or Dola Itaswara. There is another thing called Bali, in which a swara is twisted in Odia, which would be called Balaiva. The dhatu is Balaiva or Baliva. So pa dha sa. Here the dha or the dhaivata note is said to be applied with the Bali Gamaka. Pa dha sa is the straight application. Pa dha sa. This is called the Bali Gamaka. Similarly, so on and so forth, there is the Kurula Gamaka. So just to take you through the amount of terminology and Vyakarana and grammar, even in the different disciplines that was in vogue among these Avadhanis, Kurula was explained in the traditional explanation. As the Shastras will tell, Granthilaha Kantha Komalaha. It will be knotted and it will be soft. It will be softly enunciated, not hardly and clearly demarcated. So, Pada pani dani pada mapa gama rega rema gama rega sa sari saga rega sari nisa rega repa mapa gama rega sa. This is called a kurula. What is the bigger thing is that in the Avadhani tradition, this was compared by Tarini Charnopatra and other gurus such as Singari Syamasundara Kara to the precision of a potter's wheel or the rotation of a Kurala Chakra. This is called Kurula or Kurala, the Gamaka itself. And then it is compared to the motion of a potter's wheel. Rotating around one axis like this, then it is also wobbling around a different axis like a top. So there are two axes of rotation, which is told so elegantly in a single word called Kurula. So this is the Shastric tradition that was very prevalent. And then the challenge was that, of course, in the Darbar, they would say that to compose a song which will have all 15 Gamakas, or which will have this Gamaka where this letter occurs. It is an extremely difficult task. And then other kinds of demands. Compose a song in the Raga Kedaraguda, which is meant for the Varsha or the rainy season, compose a song in the raga Kedaragoda in the Tripota Tala, replicating the sound of the Megha Dambara, or they will say the sound of this Samvartaka Avartaka Megha, and compose such that it is 4 stanzas according to the 4 meghas, and each of the stanzas will be like a Suda Prabandha in a different Tala, each of them, and therefore replicate the sounds of the 4 meghas. So not only do you need to know exactly what are the sounds of the 4 meghas described in the Shastras, now you have to recreate them exactly using 4 different Talas, and you have to mention these exact Gamakas, and you have to ensure Guru Laghu, and this composition is a big part of the Sangita exams. Then there is a different part, the Mardala part, or the Bina, which I was telling. Bina, of course, the whole challenge is to ensure that the Sahitya Aksharas, or the letters, fall exactly into place as when played in the Veena, and these Gamaka is the main thing that is replicated in the Veena tradition. Then you are expected also to be a master of the Mardala, or the percussive tradition, in which there are various more complicated things such as Antargati. Things like in the Suda, you have to put one Tala here and another Tala here, and similarly 7-8 Talas in the Ashtangas. The examinations that were traditionally conducted, I have heard of 2 or 3. I will just mention that and end my talk. One examination for the Tala practitioners that was practiced in parts of Raigada and Jaipur and Paralakemundi side in southern Odisha is that the person who will be examined is supposed to chant one Tala on his mouth, and of course he is expected to do several Tanamana techniques in that as well. And he is expected to maintain another Tala with his hand. So he's enunciating one and he's keeping a different one in his hand. Then there is somebody else who is clapping on his behind. So that is, he has to keep a count of what is that. Then there is a stack of rocks in front of him. Somebody is hitting the rocks using another rock, and somebody else is stacking the rocks. So he has to keep a count of that. So keep continuous focused attention on all 4 of this. That is the task. This is one kind of Avadhana. Another thing that was there in the Tala Avadhana was that 7 or 8 lamps or deepas were lit, and they were placed in 7 parts of the body. So one deepa here, one here, one here, and 2 of these parts, then 2 on the legs, and this way 7 or 8, how many ever you can hold, and even in the palms if you can. So this is the pose that they would sit in. One such Talavadhan is still alive, fortunately. Guru Binacharya Guru Ganapati Rauta in Gurandi Paralakemundi, who is a student of Acharya Tarini Chanapatra. So he mentions this examination, and the lamps were lit. So you cannot move your hands too vigorously, otherwise it will topple over and you will be lit. So that is the thing. And 8 examiners will sit, each of them chanting a different Tala. In Odisha, the Navatala system was in vogue, so very frequently it was done using 9 lamps. The Navatalas were Adi, Jati, Nisari, Matha, Triputa, Rupaka, Jhampa, Jati, Adda, Ekatali. So these 9 talas, the Navatala were expected to be continuously put using the 9 angas of the body. So the motion bobbing of the head, then this clapping of the hand, then moving of both of these and both of the legs, and that kind of thing. So you have to maintain continuous while mentioning various kinds of trickery, and while simultaneously composing a song in the Tala, and you have to sing along and form it along the way. There will be 9 people, each keeping track of a specific Tala. So there will be an Adi Tala Dhara, a person who will only hold Adi Tala. There will be a Jati Tala Dhara, or there will be these Tala Dharas, and that's the Tala Avadhana examination that is conducted in Odisha. Similarly, then there is the more obvious things like asking about various rare ragas and asking the person to sing a prabandha composed by that poet in that time, and then of course asking you to compose a particular piece of lyric. Somebody will provide a piece of lyric that does not have any sensible chanda, and then the person whose interview is being taken will be asked to compose it in that tala. So it will be composed in a beat structure of 3-3-3 Guru Lagu, and now you will be asked to put it to tune without hampering the Guru Lagu in a Tala with 5-5 structure, or even difficult structure like 5-4-2-3-1-5. So this kind of a structure. and then you will have to do that at a time maintaining all this. Unfortunately, Talavadhani Ganapati Rauta, who is there in Gurandi, has begun to lost his memory a lot. He mentioned these facts to me some 2 years ago, and now he does not retain much of his memory. I hope he can recall certain things. So that is all the rare information that we have. So 5 people we talked about: Kavi Samrat Upendra Bhanja, Kavi Surya Baladeva Ratha, Dasarathi Kavi Chandra, and then Ashtabadhani Acharya Tarini Charana Patra, and we talked about Chandarayaguru from various parts of Odisha. So it was more of an insight into the Sangita and Kavitva sections of Avadhana. There I'll end it with this limited information and a preliminary attempt to organize all this. Namaste. Thank you for giving me a chance to present this talk.